Yo, what's up everyone? This is Ignatius, and today I am bringing to you what is probably my last build guide update of the .3 season. This is going to be the final form for my Ice Strike Shattering Explode Amazon. I've got a pretty nice slated out set of things to go over here. Structure is going to be, first I'm going to review the changes from the previous iteration for those of you that have been following. I'm going to go over some other areas you could min-max if you want to, and then for those who have been following, but also for those who have never seen this build, you could jump to an overview of how it plays in mapping, which is absolutely insane, and an overview of how it plays for bossing, which is absolutely insane. I've watched a lot of the different builds this season, and I do think this is the fastest, most efficient, rarity-based movement clearing build of the .3 season. I think it even clears better than the Chaining Heralds builds that I played in the .1 season, and it clears faster than anything I've ever played, especially considering that it still stacks 150 rarity. Okay, let's dive right in. The first and biggest change, which sets off a cascade of changes in the build, is a switch in the Quiver. So before, we were running this thing here, pretty standard Quiver for this league, crit-based proj skills, bow damage, proj speed, flat damage. That was pretty much every Quiver on every good build, and I do still use it on Weapon Swap too, so if you've got one, don't sell it, you might still want it. However, our primary Quiver is going to be Kandairo's Gambit. Hopefully you have seen it. If not, I will talk a little bit about what it does and why it's amazing. Basically, each arrow you fire gets this effect, and most of the effects have to do with the arrow chaining in some particular way. There's also the Covetous effect, which gives the arrow 600% rarity, which is really interesting. And then it can roll this enchant that projectiles have a 20% chance to chain an additional time from terrain, which is very good to have on there, but not required. But yeah, so basically, when you run around mapping with this Quiver, your arrows do all sorts of crazy things. And this enables some chaining with the Herald of Ice, unlike anything I have ever seen before. I mean, I've had, I have a widescreen monitor. I've monsters like way off of the edge of my widescreen that are dying and exploding and killing others and dropping loot. So yeah, this is like a non-negotiable for the final form. It plays totally different, and it enables a clear on the maps that is just unreal. So how do we slot this in and still have a really good build? Basically, what do you need to swap this in? I'm going to say, and this is kind of a benchmark based on some of my changes, you're in Hideout Ice Shot Tooltip with Rockiatas in, which doesn't add any DPS, needs to be about 85k for, the highest end juiced mapping. And if it's lower than that, I think you might have a hard time getting started and might be pretty vulnerable to dying when you get started in the map. Now, if you're 85 plus, you will hardly notice any difference when you switch from this to this, even with no in-map or in-combat buffs. And then as soon as those buffs get going, you won't notice any difference at all. You're just going to notice faster and better clearing. So how do we get a hideout tooltip that is this high when we drop this Quiver? Because if you look at this Quiver going in, this is, it takes us from 100 to 150. So it's an incredible more modifier to damage. So how do we get that? So I think you can do this for free in several ways. So number one, you don't need bonuses from Quiver, and you have this all over your passive tree, so you can change these to all sorts of other nodes. And if you look at my tree in the updated build, you will see that in Weapon Swap 2, I have the Quiver bonuses, but in Weapon Swap 1, which is the main clearing weapon swap, I have no Quiver bonus nodes. So that's a pretty huge and free way to do it. Again, you don't need bonuses from Quiver, so you can get a different bow, you can get different jewels, a little bit of spend there, but hopefully you're just actually just swapping item for item and not really losing currency. And then lastly, you don't really need additional arrow, and that is because the chaining from this thing functions as many more additional arrows than what you really had, and you'll see that when you actually get into mapping. So you can swap out your additional arrow sockets for these Runes of the Sky, which are best in slot here for just flat damage, and that gives you % damage as extra of all elements. Super strong. Now, if you want to spend currency to be able to run this Quiver, there are some easy ways that you can spend a lot of currency. One is a 4x flat on gloves, and by that I mean good tier flats here, and then a double or triple socket fizz damage to attacks with effect of socketed items. The other is your flat on rings. This is an area where I did make a big upgrade, so that way my resist could be capped while still running these XP runes up in the helm. I could get even better here. You see I have a tier 5 on the cold here. So it's not to say that these need to be all stacked tier 1, but you should be looking triple flat here, that's good, triple flat here, that's good, and quadruple flat here, that's good. Your Heart of the Well can roll 2 14 to 15% damage modifiers, and this is another way you can do a little bit of spend and get an incredible amount of more damage on your tooltip. I do not recommend the Chaos modifier here, as it won't scale in the same ways that the Elemental ones do. And then lastly, you can get as much as you can on your Against the Darkness over here in this socket. I shelled out for double 4s, fire and cold, as close as you can get to that for all of these nodes. That's going to be a lot more flat damage, and that's going to get your tooltip up to a decent amount so that you can run the Kadairo's Gambit. I'm going to post a screenshot on the screen, and I guess I can link it in the description of T1 flat benchmarks for the trade site. So on the trade site, when you say, I want to find something that has, fire damage to attacks, and it asks for a number, a minimum number. Cami in our Discord shared with me what that minimum number should be for each of the tier 1 rolls, and so that can save you some time and efficiency while searching. And once again, still save your old quiver for the swap for bossing if you want to. All right, second big change, continuing to cascade from the change in Quiver, and it may be obvious at this point, but you don't need bonuses from Quiver on swap 1. You can rethink your jewels, especially your emeralds. I'm still sticking with movement speed as a priority, but then priority 2 was evasion rating, which got me back up to 60% in hideout, which is incredible. And then any other 2 type of damage modifier is really good. I'll post a link in the description of a complex trade query that you can filter in terms of numbers and price. So cheapest here is 4 div, and it's really, really strong. Goes up from there, and that is me specifying pretty good rolls, sometimes perfect rolls on these modifiers. But if you're like me, you want the movement speed, because that's where we're at in this point of the build, and then you want 3x other things that are pretty good, and maybe prioritize evasion if you want to hit that 60%. And again, you don't need quiver bonuses on the bow anymore. So here's my old bow with 37% bonuses gained from quiver. Again, I have this in the swap for the bossing, but you don't really even need it there. You can just lock in bow 1. So what I've done is I've swapped out bonuses from quiver, and I've swapped in, I would recommend one of 2 things for the prefix, either elemental damage with attacks or some type of flat elemental damage as attack, and try and go for tier 1, tier 2 are these. And then in the suffix, we've got chance to gain onslaught with this weapon, which gives us attack speed and movement speed. Okay, the third big switch are the gems for lightning rods. So in the previous iteration, we sort of defaulted to rod arrow for bossing, and that of course was very successful. The goal was to get away from that and get back to the freeze and snipe, and it just wasn't possible. I did really every type of testing I could, manipulating everything, and just ended up back here on rod and arrow. But I did change up the gems in these and experimented with a lot of different things in the gems for rod. So again, note on the skill tree that we have a weapon set too, which is all for lightning rod, and we're stacking shock magnitude, quiver, and a few other things to really get some of the bonuses going there. And then on the gems for rod, we're running rig walls, which in swap 2 is 30% more damage. And then I have a super critical here that doesn't mean anything, it's just increasing my int count. But when you get to the boss, you're going to take Rakiatas from Ice Shot. If it's a really powerful boss, take Rakiatas from Ice Shot and swap it like this, and you're going to see incredible damage from this rod with that swap. And just to note that I still keep the lightning arrow as potential in 1 or 2, and that's just for flexibility while I'm mapping. The Ice Shot is a Nova proj, but if I'm running down a long alleyway or something, I can just do a couple of arrows straight forward, and it can be a little bit more efficient for that. The third section is, also straightforward, but speed improvements. I already addressed the emeralds. Heart of the Well, you can put movement speed. Again, you can get the onslaught on the bow, and then you don't need the quiver bonuses on the tree. So you can do 2 things with your saved passive nodes with no quiver bonuses. You can add more flat damage if you're trying to get that Ice Shot tooltip above 85k, or you can add some additional movement nodes. I really like this chain down here. We get 5% movement, we get a little bit of evasion, and we get this lucky effect with spring hair, which is really, really strong. I've allocated a couple other things throughout the tree in compensation for those points that were gained back, mostly related to movement. If you wanted to go even harder on movement, you could take a From Nothing that gives you Vol Pact, or you could even come over here, and then I think you get, 3, 5, 7, 8% more right here, which is great. I opted to keep the damage going and the efficiency of nodes over here, and I just really like that, but that is there if you want it. I should mention that in Hideout, my modifier to movement speed is 120 on Roa, I believe. Yep. And then when I get going, fully buffed in combat with Headhunter and everything, it goes up to about 240, which is absolutely crazy. I did want to call out in the tree that I took a different path on the tree based on Gem Enthusiast and Kite Runner. So I used to anoint this on my amulet, but now that we're down here and we've got crystallized immunities from the Megalo, we're doing Gem Enthusiast on the Anoint for the amulet. And that is because if we're looking at 4 points here or 4 points here to save on the Anoint, this one gives us more of that flat damage on the way there, which is really, really strong. So I want to call that out. Okay, some more support gem callouts. I'm not going to go through all of the gem links. Most people are familiar, and you can look at it in the guide. But one of the big callouts is Life Tap on Barrage. So most of the gems I have on Barrage are just to keep my int count up higher for crystallized immunities. However, this Life Tap is there on purpose, and it is a strength gem. What this is doing, and I covered this in my other video if you want to see more in depth how to improve your survivability, but we get excess recovery as guard, which means we just need to be missing a little bit of life, and we can get 1k extra life as guard, which is like a 33% effective hit point increase. It's ridiculous. So what we do is while we're mapping, we're running around, we hit Barrage, we lose some health, and we hit Olroths, and we gain it back as guard. So, 1k EHP on top of, it gets taken before ES. So it's a really, really nice effect. And because it's Barrage, we can just hit it again when it runs out and hit the flask again. So super strong there. Again, the other Barrage gems are just there to scale the int count. And also the gems up here in Bowshot are now there just to scale the int count for crystallized immunities. The other thing is I did a lot of testing on the gems for Tornado Shot, which is basically just there for bossing now. The Ice Shot and Herald is such a good clear. You basically never need this in the regular mapping. One thing I found I really liked is this durability gem. So when you cast the Tornado Shot, the duration is there, but the boss is almost always dead before the duration is up. However, Tornado Shot does have a limit on the number of times you can hit it, number of hits before Tornado disappears. And you will hit that number while you're bossing. So the durability, I tested this in Rod as well, and I couldn't determine whether it was for sure working. But right here, it's hits before it disappears is 10, and then hits before it disappears is 12. So I think that's solid there, and I think it makes sense. And again, I did test it on Rod, and I could not confirm that it actually worked. Okay, that wraps up section 1. That's my, quick as possible summary of what changes from the previous iteration. Now, if you want to go out and min-max even more than I have, you could. And it's going to be like probably big spend on things that are, just slight increases. Or if you wanted to get even more damage with items that are even better than what I have, you could. So again, you could go with a better bow. You could get 3 or 4 sockets. T1 flats on rings and gloves. Mine are not, decked out as all T1, so you could improve there. My move speed is a 30-30. You could get a 35-30 here. And then again, you could Giga spend on even better emeralds. They go up into the hundreds of divs. An even better Megalo, that can go up to a mirror. And then, of course, the unique golden charm, which I've never put in any of my builds, but, maybe I will one day. I think it's optional, and I do prefer to be tanky because I am still trying to get to level 100. So I think this is best in slot for those. Okay, that pretty much wraps up the sections I plan to cover, and now we'll dive into some mapping. The mapping is pretty straightforward, but I do want to show off some of the methodology I employ. General rules, just always keep moving, shoot, and move forward. Do long circles back and forth to avoid deaths. If you do still want to keep that basic shot setup for the Ice by Innervate, you can. But again, if your tooltip for Ice Shot is 85k or higher, it really isn't necessary. And again, use Barrage and Olroth, especially in the sketchy situations. So here I have my standard map, overrun by Abyss, 45 rare monsters, 100 rarity. I do think this is still the best map you can run. And I've got triple 10 quant tablets with Expedition and Breach. I still think that is best as well. We're running in Decay, which I'm pretty sure is not bugged and should work. And it's a nice open layout with some walls so you can really see the effect of the Kadairos Gambit. All right, here we go. All right, so that's kind of the general rule. Like, we're literally just holding right click. I don't let go of it. Oh, that does remind me of something. I took these 3 nodes because Unhindered reduces the movement speed penalty from using skills while moving. I do think the base penalty on Ice Shot is almost unnoticeable, but it is slightly noticeable. And then when I spec this, it's not noticeable at all. I think I am moving almost just as fast when I'm shooting Ice Shot versus when I'm not. So that's kind of what's going on there.